Oye Chumbata, today we are going to be taking a look at Black Chrome, and I already recorded this once but through the wrong microphone, so rather than a ramble, let's make this pretty quick. Black Chrome is for the new edition of Cyberpunk Red. It is approximately 170 pages long, hardcover, full color throughout. This is an equipment guide for Cyberpunk, and equipment guides for Cyberpunk have always been pretty important. Style is important, always having the newest gear and being on the edge, that's always been important in Cyberpunk, and having the correct fashion and so on has always been important. And if you played Cyberpunk 2077 or have looked at any of the art books and so on for that, you'll know that a lot of effort in Cyberpunk 2077 went into designing the fashion and the looks and the gear, lots of 3D modeling. It really stands out as an example of world design in computer games. This, of course, is Cyberpunk Red, which takes place before 2077, but you would hope that the association between Artelzorian Games and CD Projekt Red would be reflected in any modern Chromebook. This is Chromebook 1 from the 1990s. As you can see, it's been well thumbed, well used. When was this copyrighted? 1991. So this is the old Chromebook, Soriyama cover. If we quickly flip through this, you'll see that you've got nice big illustrations for most of the equipment, albeit in black and white. The statistics cost is a little bit, you get a nice bit of blurb. Everything is nicely illustrated, and then as you get towards the middle, sorry, these are a bit faded, but you get some color plates for the more fashion conscious, fashion oriented stuff, and some of the body armor and so on, like the classic Gibson battle gear that no solo could do without. The old Chromebook was very much an in-world sort of experience. It was presented like a magazine, albeit more cheaply in black and white than a glossy fashion magazine would actually be. Going through the book was immersive. It made shopping for equipment immersive. It helped ease you into the world with the blurb and the presentation and all the rest of it. The original Chromebooks, particularly one, but the later ones are okay as well, that was a hugely important part of Cyberpunk 2020 and a formative part of the experience to me. So, how does Black Chrome measure up? And unfortunately, I am going to say not well. Now, there is a lot of equipment and so on in here, and a lot of it's good and interesting. Quite a lot of it is replicated or expanded on stuff from Cyberpunk 2020, so if you're an old bee like me, you're going to see a lot that's familiar, and you're going to go aha about things like Cyberfingers and so on. That's nice, that's good, that's a nod to legacy and so on. The book largely replicates the trade dress of the main core book, which is fine, I suppose, but that does mean that it fails to stand out as its own object in the way that the original Chromebooks did. I mean, there's a few differences. So you have little icons here on the pages, like phone charge or whatever, a search bar, a shopping cart at the bottom, but the main body of the text is still in the style of the core book. The presentation, it tries in some ways to ape the experience of shopping online, but keeping the trade dress the same in the middle doesn't really follow. And a lot of the artwork, I mean, if we compare and contrast the fashion here with the fashion shoots in Chromebook 1, even though this is old and faded because it is from the early 90s, I think you can see a big difference in the presentation. In Chromebook 1, the outfits and the model are separated, differentiated, and even on a faded color plate you can see that they stand out from the background, whereas the presentation of a lot of stuff in this book is like this. It is against a dark background which it blends into. You know my complaint, my constant complaint about modern color printing in a lot of RPGs is that it ends up muddy, that you can't make things out, and that's very definitely true here. And it's disappointing when you look at the art books and guidebooks for Cyberpunk 2077, which do a great job of representing the fashion and so on without falling into being muddy. You know, they're vibrant, there's lots of contrast, you can make out the clothing items and so on well in that, and that's just not true for the material here. Some items are illustrated well and divided out from the background, but far too many aren't. And the font feels like it's a bit larger than it needs to be. Despite trying to ape an online site, the presentation of a lot of the items isn't what it would be if you were shopping online, and that muddiness problem is a big issue for me. It's not true of all the illustrations, but it's true of enough of them that for me it just doesn't work as well. These are a lot better, these linear frames. They're presented how I felt that a lot of the fashion and armor and other stuff should be. And if you think about how when you go to a website you generally have one big illustration of a model, probably against a white background or something, or a contrasting background to show what they're wearing, and then you'll have the smaller illustrations, the smaller photos of different angles of the same outfit. Now you obviously can't click on those in in a book format, but that would have been an interesting way to do it and given you more views. I mean, it would have replicated a lot of effort and been quite expensive, but it would have been better, in my opinion. The vehicles in particular suffer by disappearing against a dark background, and while the sort of neo-noir Blade Runner-esque sort of thing is part of Cyberpunk, so is 2077's more sort of West Coast, high contrast, bright lights, big city sort of style. And even older Cyberpunk, you always had the neon and a contrast between the sort of rich natural tones that the high up corporates and so on had, and the electric colors and the neon and the grime of the street. Some artwork evokes that more high visibility, high vibrance sort of almost Tron-esque style of 2077, or some of the street scenes in Blade Runner, but a lot of it doesn't, and suffers from it, to the point where the artwork, where it steps outside of this kind of muddy, washed out paradigm, just really stands out against the rest and throws the flaws of the rest of the art into sharp relief, unfortunately. But yeah, you get a good selection of stuff, a good selection of weapons, vehicles, and so on. I think there is still a problem with Cyberpunk Red, in that vehicles are way too fragile. I don't think they've addressed that in this. I will check when I get to the stats. And that it's harder to statistically differentiate between different weapons. There are less ways you can do that like for example, every single weapon uses d6s for damage, whereas in Cyberpunk 2020, something like an anti-material rifle would use d10s, which gave you, an additional mechanical way to differentiate certain kinds of weapons from one another, and how they interacted with vehicles and hardened targets and so on from one another. And you just really you don't get that in Cyberpunk Red. Plus it uses hit points rather than a wound system, so everything's just that little bit more abstracted. And honestly, I still think 2020 is the superior product, but that's just me. I mean, this is more like it, where you have the item individuated against a white background so you can see it, but reduce the font. I mean, that must be 0.11 or 12, so if you dropped that, you could move it up and over and create a bigger illustration of the item. The old Chromebook to me mostly felt like the art came first and then the description came secondarily, and you don't get that here, and it suffers as a result, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't think we actually have the statistics throughout the book. I think the statistics are all saved up for the end, which is also a bad design choice in my opinion. I think it would have been better and easy enough to fit a compressed small size stat block in here while you're browsing the weapons, as well as having it at the end, and that would make it far easier for players and games masters flipping through the book looking for items that they want, and being able to copy it down instantly, and having the reference bit at the back. But what do I know, eh? The end of the book, the last 40 pages or so, are more about black market economics, stuff that fixers can get up to, and honestly I would rather have had 40 more pages of equipment and material to shop and use from, or have had the layout done differently, perhaps less efficiently. Rather than have that, I would rather see something like these economics and so on, and NPCs in a fixer-oriented class book, perhaps. We did have one in 2020. Can't remember for the life of me what it was called, but there was one. But it's fine. Some of it's quite useful. The maps are probably quite useful, but it's just not what I would have wanted. There are some odd choices for the character models for the artwork earlier in the book. Like there's a little person, which could potentially see this confused with Shadowrun, I suppose. I guess they're thinking, increased diversity in future advertising and so on, but it just ends up looking weird and out of place. Not that I have anything against little people, it doesn't fit somehow. Yeah, it evokes Shadowrun, and that's not what you want to do in Cyberpunk. You don't want to trigger people to think about your biggest competitor, and keep your elves out of my Cyberpunk. Thank you very much. Yeah, so here's the stats for everything at the back. It's nice to have as a reference, but you could easily have put these stat blocks twice here and by the item. Let me see if I can find the vehicles. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, here is one of my major problems with Cyberpunk Red, and something that I don't feel that they have really addressed at any point, is the vehicles are incredibly fragile, right? They have the same kind of hit points as people, or even less than people. So the SDP, the structural damage points, are woefully low. Considering that relatively small caliber handguns are going to be doing 2d6 damage, can you really take out even a compact car with a handgun with not even 10 shots? Probably not, right? Because the engine block is going to be pretty sturdy. You might be able to pop a couple of tires, shatter a couple of windows, but you're not going to be able to take out even a compact car with, 5 to 7 shots. And yet you can in Cyberpunk Red. And I was hoping that maybe they would have addressed and patched that in Black Chrome, but they haven't. So yeah. Right, so ironically enough, as you know if you watch the channel, I give books marks on style and substance. Style being, how good is the look, how good is the presentation, and so on, and then substance being how easy is it to reference, how much material is in there, how much bang do you get for your buck. Now, Chromebook 1 I would mark extremely highly. For the time especially, I would have given Chromebook 1 style 5, substance 4. The later Chromebooks have more material in them, but they lose some of that style and that immersive in-world feel. Black Chrome, despite being hardcover, despite being in full colour throughout, lacks a lot of the things that made the older Chromebooks indispensable and made them so valuable at the table for bringing in immersion and making the in-character shopping experience relatively friction-free and easy. The presentation isn't really there, it's not consistent. While we've got full colour images, which is nice, a lot of them are muddy, you can't necessarily make out the equipment and understand its scale, how much you could carry, the heft and weight and usefulness of it from the visuals. There's a lot of wasted space, a lot of space that could have been used better in terms of layout, and it's especially disappointing when you consider it in the context of Cyberpunk 2077 and how effective the art and design of that game is, and the relationship between Art Azorian and CD Projekt Red. You would hope to see that reflected in the books, and I still don't know why they didn't make it a 2077 tabletop, but hey ho, there you go. So in terms of style, it is better presented than, say, a Wizards of the Coast book, but it is somewhat schizophrenic and lacks its own strong visual identity, separating it from the core book and so on. It doesn't feel like an in-world artifact in the way that the old Chromebooks did. And Cyberpunk is all about style over substance. So if the style is missing, that is really an unforgivable sin. So I would maybe give it 3, a middling 3 for style. But because it's Cyberpunk and it should be extremely stylish, I'm going to knock that kind of mid to high 3 down to a purely average 3. In terms of substance, there is plenty in here. There could have been more. The economics rules and so on are nice to have, but again, I feel that could have been and should have been in a fixer book, and we should have had even more equipment and material in here, in that 40 pages that's used on the economics and the NPCs and the maps and the blah blah blah. So there is a lot in here. I'm not sure it all belongs in this book. So I'm going to take the substance, which would otherwise be very high because an equipment book should be virtually entirely substance, and I'm going to drop that from a 5 to a 4 because of that. You lack focus, Rotus Brosham. So that gives us 3.5 out of 5, 7 out of 10, with modern production values, with access to the kind of artists and so on, and in comparison to CD Projekt Red's art books and so on, I appreciate the budget is bigger and different, but dropping to 7 out of 10 from 9 out of 10 is a big drop. So disappointing. It's $40 for the book. It is hardcover, full color. It's still useful. but it just really disappointed me from the high bar of the old Chromebooks. So yeah, 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5. Worth getting, but disappointing if you're an old bee like me. Zang. About 3,000 of you subscribe, but only about 200 are getting notifications, so click the bell and click all.
Get some plastic surgery against this society. Entropy, apathy, morality, totality. Makeup of your final days. Survival of the fittest haze. Might is right on praise. Smoke and mirrors, twisted maze. Are you strong?